In today's wood story, we are combining woodworking with lasers in order to create a really cool sign. So if you've been wondering if a laser is right for your wood shop, then you definitely want to check out today's video because I'm going to be showing you how you can both engrave and cut with a laser. So go grab your tools and let's start this wood story.
To make the sign, I sorted through my giant pile of scrap wood and decided to use pine because I had a bunch left over from a recent planter box project. You can check out that video right here. This wood was already consistent in depth, but I ran it through my new jump sander because I wanted to reveal the lighter color. You can 100% omit this step and leave the wood rustic. Just make sure all of your pieces are the same depth or your letters are going to sit all wonky later on. I then brought the pieces over to my router table and used a round over bit on the exposed edges. Once this was done, I used my miter saw to cut the pieces to size. For me, this ended up being 26 inches long. It's helpful to use a backer if you have a piece of scrap plywood lying around, as you can glue the scraps directly onto the backer instead of trying to clamp them together afterwards. This also gives you the ability to create some really cool patterns if you want to get fancy with your miter saw and angles. I didn't do it for this project, but I'll link to another video here where I did utilize this angle technique for another sign. So with the pieces cut to size and enough of them to fit onto my backer, I started the glue up. I did end up using a few clamps just to keep all the wood pieces from separating, but you can also use painter's tape as well. I left the pieces to dry overnight with some added weight on top. The next day, when the pieces were all dry, I used my cross-cutting sled to trim off the edges, and then I decided to run it through my drum sander again, because why not? Now that I have it, I may as well put it to good use. I also used my hand plane to make a slight bevel on the edges. A router or just a bit of sanding will achieve a similar result. All right, so now that I have my backing done, it is time to select my artwork for this piece. And you can absolutely go ahead and design it yourself if you have that ability. I do love doing it myself, but in this case, I am a little short on time, so I am going to purchase this. And really, for $3.54 Canadian, how can you beat this amount of different graphics that you can get? I am specifically looking for something that's going to be more like this. This is kind of what I want to be going off of. So I am going to purchase this file and then I will put it into Lightroom to do the rest of it. So what I've done now is I have taken the artwork from Illustrator and I have just copied it and pasted it into Lightroom, which is the software that I use for my laser. And I made a line all the way around, which represents the canvas or the sign that we have to fill. And I am leaving some space in the bottom, and I'll show you why afterwards. And then all I've done is I've copied it in, and then I have made it a fill layer, which is different than a line layer. A fill means it's going to engrave, where a line means it's only going to outline the edges of the graphic. But in this case, I want to do a fill line. And I did a little test here to see what it's going to look like when it's done. And I'm really happy with this because I want it to be fairly rustic, but it is a great contrast. And I also did some different layers of power just to figure out how much power it's going to have and how it's going to show after the fact. So this one was done with 400 speed and a power of 20, and this one was done with 150. And I'm going to settle on the 200 because speed is important for this as well. So the 200 is going to take me about an hour and a half. So it's not a quick thing to do, but it's going to be worth it. And I can do other things in the shop while this is going on. So it's not that big of a deal. So I have gone in, I have set this to be a fill layer, 200 speed, 20 max power, 0 for minimum power, and no air assist. And that's because I am doing an engraving and I have a great fan on my laser. So it is not needed in this situation. Your laser might be different. It might have different recommendations. So definitely do what your laser says. Mine is a 80 watt Omtech laser. So now that I have this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to place my artwork into the laser. I'm going to load this up into the laser. I'm not going to be running it from the computer. I'll load it directly from the laser. That way, if anything happens to my computer, nothing will happen to the laser work in progress. Okay, so now that's been sent over to the printer. But now that we have it over at the printer, we're going to go and we're going to find it. Hopefully there's one here that's called barbecue. Yep. And press enter. Okay, and then we are going to frame it to make sure it's still in the right place. See if I can't get my camera to work here. See, so ideally that should be somewhere towards the top here. Okay, that looks good. And I'm just going to make sure that my fan is all the way up. Get it really up to speed before I even get it started. Close that down and give it a couple of minutes just to really let the air start in here, let the suction power begin. And once I hear that it's fully up to speed, then we're gonna hit that start button. Oh, sounding pretty good now. All right, let's go.
And while this engraves, tell me in the comments below if you are currently a laser owner or if you are perhaps considering getting one. Note, it is normal to get some char outside of the actual engraving, but some simple rubbing alcohol easily removes that, or you can even lightly sand it afterwards.
So the sign is starting to look pretty good. However, one thing that I did not account for was where these numbers were going to end up in my grooved backing board. So as you can see, it's pretty hard to read the 2, 3, and the 4. The 1 would have been fine, but then there's even this little knot here. And sometimes things like that happen. But that's okay, because what I'm going to do now is I am going to do a couple more things in the laser, and we're going to make that work to our advantage, and it's going to give it a little bit more of a 3D effect when we are done. So this time we did the engraving, and now we're going to do some cutting. So in order to save this sign here, I'm going to cut out some letters on the laser, which is going to create more of a 3D effect, which will also be really cool. But the first thing I need to determine is what laser settings I need in order to cut out my laser letters. And the way that I figure that out is I can run a test file from my laser based on the type of wood. And if you run a test file such as this one, it will tell you what settings and what speed will allow you to cut out a hole. And more or less speed can result in more char, which is the black stuff around the edges that you're left with when you are using a laser, versus less, where you can still get a nice clean cut, but you'll get less char. And there's some people like the char, some people don't. Sometimes it kind of messes with the letters. So you definitely want to have a balance between those. I do not have an upgraded air assist on my laser, which also helps with that. I do have an upgraded air system in my laser, so that's great for the engraving part, but it won't really help me for the actual cutting of the letters. Now, I don't have a test file for this particular type of wood, but I just measured it, and it is 6 mil, so I'm just going to go buy something that's very similar, and that's just because I know my laser, so I'm pretty confident with the settings that I need to apply in order to cut out the letters. So I'm going to run one right now, and then we'll cut out the rest afterwards. So this actually cut it really nicely. I'm really happy with this. That looks great. And I can color these if I want. So now the idea is we're going to put them here like that. And that's going to create a pretty cool effect.
My original intention was to cut out just the letters that were hard to read, but I changed my mind and I decided to take this project in a completely different direction, which meant that I cut out pretty much all of the letters and the graphics. Obviously, had I known this from the start, I wouldn't have spent the time first engraving the sign. It did give me a key benefit, as I was able to align the letters really easily as the letters fit right into my engraving. This sign had just one thing missing, and that was a way to activate the barbecue timer. So I added a bottle opener that I purchased from Amazon to the space below the letters. And just like that, this laser engraved and cut sign was ready to be used. This project definitely ended up being a lot different than I originally envisioned. But tell me in the comments below,
Do you prefer the engraved version, or do you like this 3D effect better? Either way, I hope this project has shown you some of the fun projects that you can do when you have a laser at your disposal. For more great projects, don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out these do-it-yourself videos. I will see you soon in the next Wood Story.